This is the Ironman, 140 miles. It will push your body to its limits, farther than you thought possible. It will challenge your mind. Am I strong enough? Did I train enough? Can I make it to the finish line? You may not be the fastest, but you will be faster than those who never started. Get to the line. This is the Ironman.
I never worry that he's not out there being smart, but I just worry that something he can't control is gonna take over.
Swim temperature is about 81, maybe 82 degrees.
Swim 2.4 miles. Bike 112 miles. Run a 26-mile marathon.
There's a certain degree of purification in the pain, it's just weakness leaving your body.
Slowly burning away the fat.
To me, there's no better feeling than crossing the finish line of the Ironman.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ironman triathlete and member of the U.S. national team, Jay Hewitt.
Well, thank you. I first want to say, please feel free to relax, continue to go to the bar, get something to eat. Don't often get to speak at a reception, so I'd be more than happy if someone would bring me a beer while I'm talking here. But Brian, thank you for that introduction, and thank Novo Nordisk for inviting me to come here. If you haven't already been able to detect, I am not from New Jersey. I have hopefully a charming Southern accent. I live in South Carolina, and that's my home. That's where I grew up and where I've lived for most of my life. But this is what it is that I do. If you have never heard of a triathlon or never heard of the Ironman triathlon, what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about how I do that and how I do that with type 1 diabetes. And if you remember nothing else, because research shows that you probably will only remember about 2 to 3% of what you hear this week or this weekend or from what I say, just take home with you that if I can do this with type 1 diabetes, then your patients or the people that your employees, the people that you are caring for, the reason that you are here that have diabetes, they can do anything they want to do. In fact, they can do more than they want to do. And I'm going to walk you through about how I do this and specifically what it is that I think you can take with you to get your patients to adhere more to regimens for them to be healthy, because I know that is a big thing in diabetes management, is getting the patient to stay with the regimen, because it's a day-to-day condition that has to be managed. So for me, I told you I've been racing triathlons, been racing Ironman triathlons for about a little over a decade and a half. I spent 3 years on the U.S. national team, which was a real honor for me to qualify and race for the U.S. team and represent you in Europe, Australia, all over North America. Done, I don't know how many Ironman triathlons, dozens of them in my career, well over 25 half Ironman triathlons, which is only half the distance. It's a 70-mile triathlon. I've done hundreds of Olympic distance triathlons, which is a little short triathlon. It's the distance we do in the Olympic Games, but it's a quarter of the Ironman distance. The top finisher will do the Olympic distance in about 2 hours. The top finisher in the Ironman will do it in about 8.5 hours. So it's both a swim, bike, and a run, but it's a much shorter race. And I do those just for training and for fun and for speed work. I do a lot of individual marathons because I have to be able to run to do the marathon, the Ironman, many times at the Boston Marathon, which is going on right now in just a couple of days. Lots of cycling races. Did the Race Across America cycling race, which you probably have not heard of, but it's you've heard of the Tour de France, I'm sure. Race Across America is not quite as prestigious because we have a lot bigger country than France. It's a lot more suffering, but my teammates and I did that race a few years ago. We raced 3,000 miles on our bikes across the United States of America, from the Pacific to the Atlantic in 5 days and 16 hours on our bikes. Managing my blood sugar the whole time. You know, I've got a wife, I've got now 3 kids, 3 young kids. I don't race full time now because my kids are 6'4" and 6 months. So I stopped racing after my second child was born and now speak full time, and Novo Nordisk gives me a great opportunity to speak to a lot of people that have diabetes and healthcare professionals. I've had diabetes for 23 years. I was diagnosed in February of 1991. And as I speak around the country and meet with people, the questions that I get asked the most are usually, how do I stay motivated to do something like this, and how do I manage my diabetes to do something like this? Because I think probably many of you are thinking, if I could just get my patients or the people that I am interested in with diabetes to just do their normal life and manage it with diabetes, then you feel like that would be a victory. So let me walk you through the race and what it's like to do the Ironman, and just listen to the detail that I have to go to and how much attention that I have to pay to my diabetes management to do the Ironman. And just know that you don't have to do the Ironman in order to live healthy for 23 years with type 1 diabetes, but if I can do that, then you know, people with type 1 or type 2 can do so much more. It doesn't have to be a handicap. It really can be a source of motivation, because it's the reason that I race. I wouldn't be racing the Ironman if I did not have diabetes. I didn't race triathlons before I was diagnosed with diabetes. So anyone who is diagnosed with diabetes, their life doesn't end. My life began. It was the reason that I started racing, and then I got to the level that I was able to race with the elites and on the U.S. team. So the race, as you saw the distances, it's 140 miles. It's a 2.4 mile swim. First, I have to get up at, make sure I'm going in the right direction here. Yeah. You get up at about 3:30 in the morning and check my blood sugar, which is the same thing I do every morning. Check it several times before the start of the race. You know, when you've got type 1 diabetes, checking your blood sugar is, it's just a day-to-day thing. I check my blood sugar 7, 8, 9 times a day. I've done that for 23 years. I've checked my blood sugar over 60,000 times on my fingers. So anyone who thinks that because they've got type 1 or type 2 diabetes that they can't check their blood sugar once or twice a day, I've done it 60,000 times and my fingers haven't fallen off, and they still work. So I know that your patients and the people you care for can check their blood sugar. But anyway, I'm watching for trends to see where it's going, because no one can help me when I'm a mile offshore out there in the water. No one can spot me. I'm just a body out there in the water of arms and legs of people out there. They can't tell me versus another athlete out there. They can't say, that's the diabetic guy right there and he's going into insulin shock. It's my responsibility to take care of my diabetes. So I make sure that my blood sugar is up enough before the start of the race. Also checking over all my gear for the race, my bike, my goggles, my swim cap, my running gear for the marathon, all my nutrition. The Ironman it's 10% fitness and 90% nutrition. And that's for people who don't have diabetes, which is kind of an overstatement, but for me, that's what life is. It's all about nutrition. And when you have diabetes, really your life is centered around the nutrition. I think and I hope that you will take back to those that you are here for and interested in with diabetes. I don't quite know how to characterize it because I know you have a lot of different people in here that are stakeholders in the diabetes community. But that it's a self-management condition, but it's ultimately the lifestyle that we all should be leading, of a healthy diet and exercise. And you don't have to do the Ironman, but you can certainly lead a healthy life with it, and it can be the motivation to do that. So I do the swim. It's 2.5 miles out there in the ocean in Australia, or Lake Placid, New York, in the lake up there, or Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, or in Sweden or Denmark, wherever I am racing. Come out of the water, taking off my wetsuit, and I remember at that point that I've got diabetes. I never forget in the Ironman that I do have diabetes. I just forget the other guys in the race don't have diabetes, because it's just a part of my race. I don't know what it's like to do the Ironman without diabetes. It's been there for every step of every mile of every race for me. Even though I'm a little bit different than people being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, I was 23 years old when I was diagnosed. So I certainly remember what life was like without it. It's been a while ago, but actually my birthday is in 4 hours. So I will be 47 at midnight. So if anybody want to know how old I am. But I know what life was like before that, but honestly, I don't really remember, and it's just now how I live my life, and it's how I do the Ironman. So I come out of the water. I don't want to rip my insulin pump off my arm, because that's where I wear an insulin pump on my tricep, which is usually right back there behind my tricep right there. And as I'm ripping off my wetsuit, I got to think, don't rip off your insulin pump. Constantly thinking about it, and I think with diabetes, you just have to accept it and constantly be thinking about it. I respect my diabetes, but I'm not going to surrender to it. And respecting it means that I'm not going to try to forget it or forget it or just deny it. I'm not living in denial. I want to live like I don't have diabetes, but that's not living in denial. That's living in determination, that I want to be normal, perhaps maybe a little bit different than normal, but do it with diabetes. And ultimately, that's how you should handle, I think, anything that happens in your life. It's making the bad thing that happens to you the best thing that ever happened to you. And whether that's a health condition like diabetes or some other ones that are much more difficult to manage and deal with than diabetes, they happen. How are you going to handle it? Or something in your life, in your career or your personal life. They happen, and now you've got to figure out a way to manage it and deal with it. And I wanted to try to figure out a way that I was going to get revenge on this disease. I became angry at it. My wife tells me that I look like sometimes when I'm racing out of anger, but it is a little bit of anger. I will use every last muscle, fiber, cell, calorie, follicle in my body to get to the finish line of the Ironman after 8.5 or 9 hours. But I always have just enough strength at that finish line to turn around and step on the neck of this disease that's chained to my ankle for 140 miles and say, you're messing with the wrong guy. So it's a matter of just simply trying to prove that diabetes is not going to stop me. And if you can convey that to someone that has diabetes, that it doesn't have to stop you. In fact, it can be something that can help you, because you can start eating more healthy, you can start exercising more, and those around you should be doing the same thing, and they don't have diabetes. But you should be doing it. So it's now a motivation as well as something that you really need to be doing. So anyway, when I come out of the water, I head into the transition area, jump on my triathlon bike, my $12,000 carbon fiber time trial racing bike, and start cycling 112 miles. The cycling portion of the race is what I'm the best at. Like everybody, we are best at certain things, we're good at certain things, and weaker in others. Cycling is my strength in the race, and I take advantage of my strength. It's also where I have to do most of my fueling. You might find some of these things interesting. a lot of people want to know just the nutritional demands of the race. I'll give you just kind of the skinny. Over the course of the Ironman race, I'll burn about 12,000 calories during the race. And, you won't burn 12,000 calories in a week. And I'll burn it in, 9.5 hours. But I can only consume about 2,000 calories in the race. So if I'm burning 12,000, I'm consuming 2,000, I'm losing 10,000 calories that I'm burning. And where am I getting it? I'm getting it from fat in my body that I'm metabolizing as a fuel source. And I have to keep my heart rate down below my anaerobic threshold, which is like an Indy race car driver. My friend Charlie Kimball, who's an Indy race car driver with type 1 diabetes, his car is like my body. My body is like his car. He's got to go as fast as he can for as long as he can, as efficiently as he can, and not burn up his engine and not burn up his fuel. And that's the same with me, because I'm burning fat as a fuel source because I cannot consume enough fuel to power that race. So I probably will lose about 7 or 8 pounds during the race in that one day. I consume about 3 gallons of liquid during that race, during that one day. I need between 60 and 80 grams of carbohydrate every hour to keep myself from getting low blood sugar, but making sure any more than 80 grams of carbohydrate per hour, I'm going to get high blood sugar. Of course, then making sure that I have the right amount of insulin. I use Novolog insulin in my insulin pump, and making sure that I have the right amount. So these are things that are constantly going through my head during the race. Again, never forgetting that I have diabetes, but it's just a part. It's just another aspect of the race for me. I come off the bike after about 4.5 to 5 hours, depending on where I am in the world. And, at that point, it's 85, 90 degrees, whether I'm in Australia or Hawaii or somewhere in some other tropical place. It's about noon at that point. I've swam 2.5 miles, biked 112 miles, and now I think my day's almost done. All I got to do is run a marathon, and I'm finished. So I run the transition area, grab my transition bag, throw off my cycling shoes, and throw on my running shoes, grab my blood sugar meter, check my blood sugar, and then head out in the marathon course. And then I transitioned to being a marathon runner, because that's the thing about the Ironman. You have to be able to do all 3 sports and perfect all 3 of them, and then be able to transition between all 3 of them, and then put them behind you. So at this point, then I'm a marathon runner, and I'm thinking about what makes me a good marathon runner. And it's difficult to consume a lot of food and nutrition while you're running. I have to do most of my fueling during the cycling portion of the race, but that's the disadvantage that I have from the guys who don't have diabetes. They can consume a lot more fuel on the bike than I can, because their bodies will naturally handle that, and I have to make sure I get enough insulin to handle that, so it's harder for me to do that. So I'm always running just very close to the line to just, blowing up. But that's just the cards I was dealt in life, and these are the cards I'm going to play, because I got no other choice than to race the Ironman with diabetes, and I figured out how to do it. Some days it gets me and will ruin my race, but other days I get it right, and that's what makes the finish line that much more exhilarating and satisfying for me. I feel like it's more satisfying for me, and anytime you overcome something that maybe only you knew that you overcame it, but you know it. And when you do, that feeling of satisfaction stays with you, and it never leaves you. When people ask me, what do I think about when I'm training and racing? It's hours and hours of training, 20 hours a week of training, workouts twice a day, every day, long workouts of 6, 7 hours at a time. I think about the finish line. It's the last 100 meters of the race, and it's the moment that I'm thinking about constantly. Of a 140-mile race, it's the last 100 meters, and it's that feeling, knowing what I had to deal with and what I had to overcome, and it's my finish line vision. You probably saw that's what I talk about. It's having a finish line, a vision of your finish line, and I encourage people that have diabetes and people that treat people with diabetes to ask their patients, what is your finish line? It doesn't have to be a fitness finish line. It can be simply you seeing your grandkids in 10 years, or if it's something in their life, a health and fitness finish line, you in an event, and later on this summer, and you walk into an event and you're wearing an outfit you can't wear right now, and everyone's looking at you, and you think about that and you visualize that. And that's what motivates you to exercise, to train, to not eat that, or maybe eat a little bit less of that, rather than working on a number. A number like a number that you set, a lab number, a weight or some other numbers. Yes, those just measure how well we're going towards our finish line vision. I definitely monitor all my numbers, but ultimately, whether my splits in the cycling and the swimming and the running portion of the race and my pace are ways I just measure my progress, but ultimately I want that moment that I have visualized for months and months and months when no one was there with me, and I could feel that moment. And that's what I think you have to do, and that's a lasting motivation. So ask your patients and those people, what is your finish line? It's unique to you. I'll tell you a little bit just about racing and finishing, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. I told you I think you have to make the bad thing that happens to you the best thing that ever happened to you, whether that's diabetes or something in your career, if that's happened to you, or whether it's in your health or your career or your personal life. I think you also have to be willing to fail. Too often people with diabetes or some health condition get understandably timid and intimidated by it. Again, if I can do the Ironman and race on the U.S. national team with type 1 diabetes and managing my blood sugar and taking insulin and checking my blood sugar, then I believe I have proved that you can do just about anything you want. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have to manage it carefully. It just means you can do it. When I was diagnosed with diabetes in 1991, I didn't know anybody who had diabetes. I remember I was just out of college, and I ended up in the emergency room of a hospital, and I was so sick and ketoacidosis and had lost all this weight, and I'd been living essentially away from home, and as a young guy in his 20s, and no one knew. I thought I had the mono or the flu or mono or something like that, and so I woke up and I had IVs in my arms and tubes in my nose in the emergency room, and there was an endocrinologist standing over me that day, and she looked down at me and said, "You've got diabetes." And I remember asking her 3 questions in the emergency room that day. The first one I said was, "What's diabetes?" Because I didn't know. I mean, no one in my family has type 1 or type 2 diabetes to this day. Didn't then and doesn't now. And she told me, and I said, "Am I going to die?" And because I thought I was dying. I mean, there was something wrong with my blood, and there was really serious complications. She was kind of implying a little bit about how serious it was, and she said, "No, you're not going to die, but your life is going to change." And the last question I asked her was, "Is there a cure?" And she said, "No, not today." And I'll never forget, she walked out of that emergency room, and I rolled my head over, and I know tears came to my eyes as I sat there in that emergency room thinking, okay, what is life going to mean for me? And while great organizations are trying to cure this disease, and great companies like Novo Nordisk are making products to help me manage it, and that you are doing your part, ultimately the cure is up to me and how I live my life. And, while diabetes is that ball and chain that's around my ankle, and you've probably seen that with other people, that it's in their diabetes or something else, they carry it with them of every step of every day, but mine better be able to swim, because I'm going to drown it for 2.5 miles. And it better have thick skin, because I'm going to rip every bit of its flesh off its body, and it better have strong bones, because I'm going to break every bone in its body as I'm in that marathon slamming it on the ground for 26.2 miles in that marathon until I get to that finish line and can step on its neck and tell it again it's messing with the wrong guy. So the second thing I say is you just have to be willing, not be afraid to fail. I decided I wanted to run a marathon. That was my first goal. I didn't race triathlons and never run a marathon before diabetes, and I did it just as an amateur and did okay. but it was certainly not one that I won. It did real well at it, but I thought if I can do a marathon, I might be able to do something else. And they started talking at this marathon about triathlons, and so I said, I'm going to try to do a triathlon. And I did a triathlon, and then I did another one, and then I did my first Ironman triathlon, and I saw these top world-class athletes at that race, and it became my goal to be one of those guys and to qualify for the U.S. team. And I didn't have a choice but to do it with diabetes. So I'll tell you this last story, and then I'll let you get back to the bar. It took me several years of racing to doing that, and don't think that it was a career that was not without its failures and trips, because I certainly fell flat a lot of years in a lot of races, both just managing diabetes, but also just learning triathlon and dealing with the difficulty of the race. There was one particular year I did 4 Ironman triathlons in about 6 months, and I did one in June of the year, just trying again to qualify, and had a good swim and a great bike, but I got in the marathon. I was so dehydrated in the marathon because I'd had high blood sugar on the bike, which is, with diabetes, you get high blood sugar, your body naturally tries to expel all the glucose, which is dehydrating your body. And I dehydrated myself, also racing an Ironman triathlon in 100-degree heat, also with high blood sugar. Not intentionally, but that was one of the complications that I had to deal with. And I collapsed in that marathon, and even though I was one of the fittest, fastest guys I knew in the world, I didn't even finish the race. And then I had to go to Europe the next week and race on another race the next week. I had 2 Ironmans in 6 days, 2 different continents of the globe. Again, and I was still trying to qualify and race with the top guys, and I didn't do real well in Europe, and I came back to the U.S. and did another race, and had difficulty once I got to the early part of the marathon and had to walk 18 miles of that marathon because I was so sick with gastrointestinal problems of just all the gels and the bars and things that I was trying to consume in moderation, but enough. And so you can see my career was going real well at that point. I knew I was fast, and I knew I was fit, and I knew I was determined, but just desire and skill is not enough. The Ironman it's speed, power, and endurance. It's swim, bike, and run, but it's muscle, mind, and heart. It's not just your muscles. It definitely requires your fitness, your legs and your core strength and your shoulders and your cardiovascular fitness and your heart and your desire, but it really also requires your mind. And I think that's where diabetes perhaps gives me a bit of an advantage, because I'm so meticulous about my diabetes, and the best athlete in the Ironman is not necessarily the fittest. Ironically, it's so physically demanding that it's the smartest athlete who will win, and how he paces himself and how he practices his nutrition, and then when he knows when to go hard and then when to hold up. So, but I finally got to a point in my career that one year did those 3 races, and I had my 4th Ironman that year, and it was in November of that year. It's the same weekend as the New York Marathon, and I decided to race one more Ironman rather than do the New York Marathon, and for that season. And I was having a really good race, and I was in the marathon. I was finally doing well, and up there with the leaders, the top guys in the world. And I knew them; they didn't know me, but I'd been following them for years. And I'll never forget this: that I was at mile 20 of that marathon. And these 2 guys passed me, and it was a guy from Germany, and it was a guy from the U.S. that are the top, athletes in the world. And they looked at me as they went by, like, who is this guy that's up here in front of us? And they were running faster than I am capable of running, but I'd gotten ahead of them on the bike and held them off for 20 miles of the marathon. And I got in behind them. I just wanted to grab their jerseys as they went by and hold on to them. And I held on to them for, not literally, but for 3 miles, and we ran with them. And I got to mile 137 of that race, and having had such a poor year that year and not even finished one race and having to walk the last 18 miles of my most recent race, and here I am at mile 137. I've only got 3 miles to go, and the pain was indescribable. I mean, it was it's hard to describe what it feels like. It's like someone is grabbing a towel and wrapping it around your leg and just twisting it tighter and tighter and tighter and pouring gasoline on it and setting it on fire. Just the burning in your chest. It's like someone's pouring battery acid in your throat, and you've got lactic acid coming out of your teeth and your eyes. And these two guys are starting to pull away from me, and I'll never forget at that moment that I saw my coach in the crowd. And it was the last 3 miles of the race, and I was in a delirious, pain-induced coma, just trying to get to that finish line. And I knew that, at any moment I could have just blacked out. I was struggling so much to hang on to these guys, and my dream was slipping away. And he stuck his head out of the crowd and said one thing to me as I went by. He just screamed because he knew how much I wanted it, and he knew how much I'd gone through, and he just yelled out, "How bad do you want it?" Because it didn't matter at that point, everything that he had taught me. And at some point in life, it doesn't matter about everything that you have been taught, whether it was in school or your job or whatever fitness regimen you're on, or even sometimes in your health care. It's just how bad do you want to keep going? And I wanted it for the 10,000 times I'd stuck myself with a syringe 4 or 5 times a day since I'd been diagnosed with diabetes until I got an insulin pump. I wanted it for the 50,000 times. I told you I'd prick my fingers checking my blood sugar. I wanted it for really for that one moment in time, that to be more than I thought I could be that day that I told you about, that I was in that emergency room in 1991 when I was diagnosed, and I had IVs in my arm and tears in my eyes, and looked up at that doctor, and she said, "You've got diabetes and your life is going to change." So, a fire erupted in me, and I raced with those two guys. I hung on to them. I got to the last 100 meters of the Ironman that day, and it's exactly like my finish line vision that I told you about has always been, that I dreamed about on every 5 a.m. swim in the pool in the dark, and every 100-mile bike ride by myself in the mountains, and every 18 to 20-mile run in the sleet in January alone. And I was slapping the hands of the spectators as I went down that finishing chute, and the photographers were lining up to take their picture, and the race announcer said, "From the United States of America, Jay Hewitt." And I crossed the finish line that day in 9 hours and 47 minutes and 14 seconds. And well, I collapsed in the arms of the officials there at the finish. I had nothing left in my body, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. And I'll tell you this last thing. They brought me in the medical tent, and they put an IV in my arm, and I remember at that point thinking how ironic and wonderful the circle of life is, that the worst day of my life, I was in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm and too weak to even stand, with tears in my eyes. And there I was after this race in a medical cot in the medical tent after this race with an IV in my arm to rehydrate me, and tears in my eyes of joy, and too weak to stand and lift my head. And the circle was now complete. And I wouldn't have had it any other way, because if I had never had that day in 1991 when I was diagnosed with diabetes, I never would have had that day. And that day was the greatest day of my life at that point. So I hope you will take that message back to those who you manage, to you care for, that diabetes, make it the best thing that ever happened to you. Have a finish line vision of what they want to be, what they want to become. Don't be afraid to fail, and earn that finish line just by doing what it requires to manage this disease. So thank you for allowing me to come, and thank you, Novo Nordisk, for inviting me to come to be here.
So when you consumed your 80 grams of carbs an hour, what did you use?
For carbohydrates?
Right.
Yeah, it's a combination of sport drink and then different sport products, like sport bars, like say this Cliff Bar right here has 42 grams of carbohydrate. I need about 300 calories, 350 calories per hour. So, I mean, Cliff Bar sponsors me, but I'm not trying to plug them. So, but it's things like that. It's gels. It's sport drink. So it's a combination of liquid and solids. I use the normal sport nutrition. I don't use diabetes nutrition. I do have certain drinks that have a very high carbohydrate content. Actually, I may be able to go back to one of these slides right here. Well, you can see right there in that picture, that right there has got gel in it, and I can reach down. I'm carrying a gel pack, and I can reach back there and grab that, and that's got a gel I squeeze out. Well, that's just a sport gel for other athletes. This drink right there has got 100 grams of carbohydrate right there. The other athletes in the race that don't have diabetes are not using that because it's got a lot more carbohydrates, but I'm just maybe sipping that because they don't have quite the carbohydrate fine balancing act that they have to worry about.
Can you explain that to people that don't know that when you're in a heavy exercise process, what happens physiologically? It's opposite of when we're setting and we do nothing.
Yeah, exercise will lower your blood sugar. I guess the point about how many carbohydrates I eat, I'll tell you, I'm just a patient again. This is not Novo Nordisk or anyone else endorsing my comments, but I'm not doing anything that's particularly revolutionary. I'm just telling you as a patient what I do in my life. That I will consume between 60 and 80 grams of carbohydrate per hour, every hour during the race. So if I'm out there for 10 hours, that's 800 grams of carbohydrate during the race, but I never bolus for those carbohydrates. So I'm only taking a small basal dose of insulin. So you should say, well, if I sat right here and ate 80 grams of carbohydrate and did not give myself a bolus of Novolog insulin, my blood sugar would skyrocket. But because of the exercise, I need a very small amount of insulin. So message is, exercise lowers your blood sugar, all right? It just automatically, physiologically keeps your blood sugar down. I do fight adrenaline spikes, which is the other problem that I have in races. It will skyrocket my blood sugar, not because of anything I consume, but it's because of the natural fight or flight that your body produces adrenaline, and so then that will skyrocket my blood sugar. So I have that problem that my blood sugar will it'll go high, and then I have to, and I have to try to take insulin maybe to bring that down. I can't really feel it, but when I'm racing, because it's such a debilitating race, but I will certainly, if I don't do something about it, it'll cause me problems 4 or 5 hours later in the race from dehydration, because I've got high blood sugar for 2 or 3 hours, and it's dehydrating my body.
One more question, may I ask?
Mm-hmm.
Do you utilize CGM, continuous glucose monitoring?
Yeah, good question. I have in races, but they're not particularly useful for me in the Ironman because of just the logistics of the race. First, the swim. I get nothing out of it during the swim. I can't look at a receiver a mile offshore in the ocean when I'm trying to swim. And then getting back on the bike, I could maybe use it, have it, but I'd have to make sure that it would calibrate with the sensor in my body at that point. So getting that timing, it takes me about a minute to a minute and a half when I get out of the water before I'm on my bike. So getting those two things to immediately calibrate and speak to each other. But then running with that during the marathon is also a bit of a hassle too. So I don't. I have, but I didn't find that it really was that beneficial. But they're great tools off the race course.
My straight marathon runners use the CGM, but they're not doing the triathlon.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
How do you handle the swimming part? I mean, as far as the pump.
How do I handle the swimming part as far as the pump? Well, I've worn different pumps over the years. The pump I wear now is the Omnipod pump, and so it's waterproof, and I just can wear it on my tricep, and so I can swim in that, and that's where it has my Novolog insulin. But I've worn other pumps that have the tubes. I'm sure y'all know those. I would just take it off during the swim, and I would do the swim. I mean, I'm swimming. I can swim 2.5 miles in about 1 hour. So, you know, take the pump off for 1 hour, it's not going to be a big problem. Yeah, I'm swimming. I'm not sitting, I'm swimming. So, you know, my blood sugar is not going to go up because, you know, I'm exercising. And I'm only hitting, like, losing that, like, 1 unit of, you know, basal insulin. So it's really not that big a deal to take it off during the swim. So, and then I put it back on for the bike and the run when I wore that pump. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know what your normal routine, exercise routine is now.
My normal exercise routine right now. Don't I look like I'm still fit enough to do the Ironman? Yeah, I still train now. I don't train when I was racing full time and on the U.S. team. So right now I don't do nearly as much cardiovascular. I do a lot more strength training now. So you know, normally I would be racing. I mean, I'd be training 3 to 5 hours a day when I was racing full time. Now it's maybe workouts of 1.5 hours or so a day. Nothing real crazy. So. Yeah, and I just enjoy doing different strength training now, and some still cycle a lot, but that's just more for fun. I like it. So, yeah, yes, ma'am.
When you were doing the triathlon,
Mm-hmm.
Did you go did you adjust like what your intake was for carbs during the race, like how you felt, or was it more you had kind of worked out a schedule that worked with the demands of the triathlon?
That's a good question. She asked did I just go on feel for what I ate, or did I have a nutrition plan that I was trying to execute during the race? Both. I would have a nutrition plan, but then I would just adapt and react. Adapt and react, adapt and react. And that's what you're constantly having to do, even outside of the blood sugar, you know, adapt and react to the race. My competitors, you know, I got a guy that I'm watching, he takes off on the bike. Do I follow him? Do I go? You know, it's mile 30, you know, we still got another, you know, 110, you know, or 100 and, you know, whatever miles to go. I got to make that decision, you know, and so I'm constantly thinking, but I would generally execute a nutrition plan, trial and error. You know, through training and then races. And that's what diabetes management is really trial and error. Anyone who thinks that they can just go in and, you know, take a pill and forget it, or, you know, never check their blood sugar, or, you know, no, you have to, you know, eat something, you check your blood sugar. Wow, my blood sugar is really high. Yeah, that's strange, because I ate that same thing last week and my blood sugar was not high, because your body is wonderfully complex. So I always have to be willing to pay attention to it and then try to just stick to my plan if it's working. So.
We're quoting you on that, wonderfully complex. Your body is wonderfully complex. I'm using that.
Yeah.
So Jay, you mentioned that you would follow a nutrition plan and then adapt. How involved were your clinicians along the way?
Yeah, good question. My endocrinologist will freely admit that I am the only patient he has that races triathlons. Bright guy, I will give him credit for doing what I needed as a patient, and I think what every patient needs, and that is educating himself and then being willing to educate me and expose me to all the things that are on the market. That's the worst thing, is not being able to have access to all the different tools or the different insulins, whether, you know, the different insulin delivery devices. So, you know, he was involved, but ultimately the responsibility was up to me about how I managed it, and then he would just look at my numbers and listen to me, and I think he realized that, you know, that I was going to be I couldn't do this if I was depending on someone else to manage my diabetes. And I don't think you can even live a normal life if you're depending on someone else to manage your diabetes, because your spouse or your parents or your coworkers are going to be ending up having to help you, or the ER physician is going to be ending up having to deal with you because you are refusing to take that initial responsibility. And it's no one else's responsibility to manage my diabetes before me. That's mine. So I'm gonna take that responsibility first, and then rely on others when I need them. All right, well, the bar's still open, so thank you very much.